Former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer's new book, reportedly full of mistakes and errors. ABC News White House correspondent Jonathan Karl wrote in a recent review for the Wall Street Journal that Spicer's memoir is, quote, much like his tenure as press secretary, short, littered with inaccuracies, and offering up one consistent theme: Mr. Trump can do no wrong. Well, here's one example. John Karl points out to us, quote, Mr. Spicer has not been well served by the book's fact checkers and copy editors. He refers to the author of the infamous Trump dossier as Michael Steele, who is in truth the former chairman of the Republican National Committee and not the British ex-spy Christopher Steele.
Although possibly one of the co-authors of the dossier.
Well, Michael Steele was an MI6 agent for a time, and he joins us now. Michael, good morning. What hand did you have in the dossier, and why have you kept it quiet for so long?
I just have, the only thing I have to say is Steele. Michael Steele.
There it is. There it is. You're hired. And here on set with us, politics editor for the Daily Beast, Sam Stein. Sam, good morning.
Hey,
man. Good to see you.
Yeah, of course.
You were admiring Donnie's look today, his summer look.
I was going to wear the same exact outfit. I'm so glad I didn't do that.
You know, even when I demonstrate,
can I say Donnie's suit is greater than your entire net worth? Sam.
Yeah, probably.
See, even when I show the proper respect for the show and dress with sartorial splendor, I still get abused.
Well,
I'm not just with you.
Was that a compliment?
Thank you.
Sam's riding the prep school look forever.
Nobody wants to see that Baby Gap T-shirt, Donnie. Nobody wants to see that Baby Gap.
What was that movie with Brendan Fraser? Like
School Ties.
There you go.
Yeah.
That was a good movie.
It is about
Damon was in it. Yeah. All right, let's get to the Daily Beast big scoop last night. Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill of Missouri, first identified candidate now to be targeted by Russian hackers ahead of the midterm elections.
And they don't know what they're getting into.
The Daily Beast was the first to link McCaskill to phishing attempts to infiltrate her campaign through staff's email passwords. Around the time of the hack attempt, President Trump was in Missouri chastising McCaskill and asking the crowd to vote her out of office. We first learned of Russia's midterm hacking attempts last week during a security forum.
Earlier this year, we did discover that a fake Microsoft domain had been established as the landing page for phishing attacks, and we saw metadata that suggested those phishing attacks were being directed at 3 candidates who were all standing for election in the midterm elections. I can tell you that they were all people who, because of their positions, might have been interesting targets from an espionage standpoint as well as an election disruption standpoint.
Senator McCaskill has been highly critical of Russia and is a top Senate Democrat facing tough re-election this year. She issued a statement saying the cyber attack was unsuccessful and, quote, it is outrageous that they think they can get away with this. I will not be intimidated. It's an amazing report, worth everybody's read at the Daily Beast. Sam, why Senator McCaskill, according to the reporting of you guys?
Well, that's a really good question. I think it's also an unanswered question. There is the coincidental timing of Trump going to Missouri saying, we got to vote her out, and then within the month this happens. She was highly critical of Russia. She's also been highly critical of WikiLeaks.
Yep.
But those are circumstantial. We haven't figured out why it was targeted at her, although she is one of the more vulnerable senators up in 2018. But what really struck me about this was just how unsophisticated the whole thing is, really. They set up a fake page, they tell you that your email password has expired, and then they ask you to log in and change it. And that's literally it. And anyone can be duped by that. I talked to
verification.
Yeah, two-step verification. Now, I talked to a cyber security expert on the Democratic side of the ledger who said this is the simplistic elements of this. They will catch up with people if they aren't prepared right now. So anyone who's running for 2020, your campaign may not be targeted during that campaign, but the aides who are working on campaigns now and then go to your campaign, they may be targeted now and they may bring that hacker with them when they come to your campaign. So it's unsophisticated, but it's definitely malicious.
Casey, is this something that they're worried about on Capitol Hill before this report even came out? I mean, you're such a high-profile senator targeted. Yeah. It could be anybody.
Sure. This is something, I mean, this is not the first time that this has happened. Other members of Congress at, kind of on a lower profile scale have been targeted using similar methods as what we saw with John Podesta's emails in the presidential campaign. And it has been something that a lot of members, despite the president's repeated insistence that none of this is happening, none of it matters, we shouldn't, don't look at that. Members of Congress, especially those on the Intelligence Committee, have access to deep information about these kinds of attempts to penetrate their campaigns, and they are concerned about it. Now, to Sam's point, you know, a lot of these congressional campaigns, there aren't presidential campaigns. I mean, John Heilman, you know this. You've covered both of them. They're often shoestring operations. There's often inexperienced. People have to start someplace. They're often young. You can make a mistake like this. Sometimes the people who are most vulnerable are actually people who are older. John Podesta, for example, fell victim to this, whereas other staffers didn't.
Yeah, I mean, look, you think about congressional campaigns, a lot of these campaigns, it's not like they even have an IT department.
Right.
They're talking about, and their security amounts to like a McAfee antivirus software that everybody has installed in their computers. They're if not shoestring operations, they're not running with the level of vigilance or the level of technical sophistication that presidential campaign. And I would say it's not just congressional campaigns. There are a lot of Senate campaigns that don't have anything that resembles a genuine, I mean, even multi-million-dollar Senate campaigns that don't have anything that resembles an IT department, unlike the multi-million-dollar, nearly billion-dollar operation that the Hillary Clinton campaign or Donald Trump campaign is involved in. And as you said, Casey, even those campaigns, with all of their vigilance and all of their focus and knowing that they might be targeted, still you can find someone like John Podesta, others on the campaigns who made simple mistakes that ended up causing a huge amount of chaos.
Michael Steele, it's a new world out there. I imagine this isn't something you worried a ton about when you were the chair of the RNC.
Actually, not as much then as now.
Yeah.
I mean, we did find, interestingly enough, when I came in as chairman, that a significant number of state party operations didn't have websites or had poorly managed websites. So every little entry point was vulnerable and has been vulnerable for quite some time. You know, there was a point in that that period where everybody was focused on the Democratic Party being hacked. Folks now realize the Republican Party was hacked as well. So despite this idea that this was a push to sort of help Trump or help Hillary Clinton, the bottom line is that we had foreign agents who figured out the play inside of our electoral system. It's a big deal for 2018, folks. Do not underestimate the opportunity here with so much on the line in terms of power and control of the House, how that plays out on legislation that could impact Russian interests between now and 2020. So there's a lot at stake here. And Claire McCaskill's campaign, I think, is the tip of a very, very deep iceberg.
And let's just say one really quick thing. It's just the reality is that, like on presidential campaigns, you go back to John Kerry in the 2008 campaign, there have always been hacking attempts and successful hacks of presidential campaigns. The difference between what happened in 2016 and what's going to happen now and past efforts is that the past efforts are generally done by the Chinese, who are looking for information but not weaponizing that information. 2016 and now into 2018 is hacking the information and then putting it out in order to cause political damage as opposed to just gain intelligence.
Donnie, what's the obligation that these campaigns should have? I mean, one of the big fights that I've been covering on the Hill is calls for people to stay away from whatever information is gleaned via Russian hacking attempts. You know, don't put it in your ads. Don't spend money pushing a claim that was hacked.
You know, before I get to that question, speaking of hacking, and this still stuns me, last week, the week before, the Republicans voted down a bill that would add additional money to protect our voting apparatus. You know, we talk about hacking into information, people's emails, that they actually said, no, we're not going to spend money to make sure that the process in 2018 and 20 going forward is protected, because it's the same technology. Hacking is hacking. So, you know, if we ever get to the point where people are doubting elections, it's over. As far as, you know, Casey, your question, I go back to even bring this back to Trump. I believe at the time in the idiot defense, I even believe at the time when Trump was getting the information from Russians, he was like, this is great, you know. So I think that there's now obviously a heightened understanding, if there were any gray areas whatsoever about getting money from, getting information from hostile foreign actors, that I do think right now that every campaign would have an oversensitivity to it.
So there's actually conversations happening right now between the top people at the Democratic House campaign arm and the Republican House campaign arm about this very question. What do you do when hacked material makes its way into the public domain? And they're at an impasse right now. The Democratic campaign arm is saying, under no circumstances should anyone use that material whatsoever. We should make a pact, and that way it can't be weaponized. Or it can be, but it won't be as damaging. The Republican position has been, how can we ignore hack material that makes its way out into the press. Let's say the New York Times writes a big expose on emails that were hacked by the Russians, which they will do because these are editorial choices that the press often makes, and for good reason. Are we at that point not allowed to reference the New York Times? Are we not allowed to reference the Washington Post material? And so that's where the impasse is. And I don't see how you bridge that divide. I know they're trying to figure out a way, but if it's out in the public domain and the Republicans say we should have to use it, Democrats are saying, no, you can't use that.
Well, that's what happened in the 2016 campaign with the Podesta emails. They just flooded out into the public sphere, and I think there's some evaluation now about how that should be handled.
In the 2016 campaign, there was, I believe, one instance where on the debate stage, a candidate specifically referenced, not the presidential, congressional, specifically referenced hack materials. That would have been a step too far in the current discussions that they're talking about.
So, Heidi Prisbilla, as you cover Capitol Hill, we have now this very public case of Senator McCaskill, attempted hacking, not a successful one. What's the level of concern you pick up among other members?
I think there is a divide between the Hill and between this administration, because you saw just recently the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen kind of downplay this threat. And at the same time, if there is one issue where Republicans and Democrats are aligning, it is on the issue of election security. They've already, without making a lot of hay, dispersed more money to the states for election security. There is now pending consideration for another disbursement of money to the states. To the question of why Claire McCaskill, though, as you guys were discussing earlier, I mean, why don't we just go with the most obvious explanation, which is that Donald Trump has had no pretense, unlike with some of the other red state Democrats, of having any kind of a good relationship with Claire McCaskill. He went to Missouri and criticized her in her own state, unlike what he's done with some of these other red state Democrats. She came out early in opposition to Brett Kavanaugh, unlike the other red state Democrats. So they've had this friction from the beginning. She's an obvious target. And that is where you see the interests of these Russian bots and the Russian campaign align directly with the president. It will be interesting to find out who those other two Democratic members are, and also to understand what the scope is going into 2018, because Facebook, Zuckerberg was just questioned in a conference call recently, and he flat out refused to say what they know about what's already going on in 2018 on his platform.
Worth reading the piece at the Daily Beast today. Coming up next, we'll bring in Axios' Jonathan Swan with his new reporting on the Michael Cohen story. And as we go to break, the White House noted a minor change to the president's travel plans yesterday morning, citing bad weather and fog, but there was a problem with that. Our own Hallie Jackson posted this photograph, writing, "The view from my office window as the White House makes a bad weather call," meaning the president will take a car to Andrews rather than depart via his helicopter from the South Lawn, where reporters can gather to shout questions at him. Perhaps even the weather has become fake news. We'll be right back on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.